Thank you very much. That was a longer introduction, and thanks for the plug for committee membership. So that means when I ask you to join a committee, you should say yes. But seriously, I think working together with the community on committees and trying to improve things is something that I have enjoyed a lot, and I would encourage everyone to think about. You know, it's not your main activity, but it's your way to give back and also help improve the situation for you and for everyone. So today what I want to talk to you about is most of it will be about work of that I've done with my students related to sampling-based task and motion planning. And also, as Mark alluded to at the end, I will give you a little preview of a brand new, well, brand new, I guess, we're a year into this project, which is the wildest thing I've ever worked on. So we don't have much results yet, but it's, you know, a really amazing project. So first off, you know, I think probably I don't need to do this explanation here, but, you know, I will just kind of run quickly through some of the examples of, you know, motion planning problems. So, you know, the basic motion planning problem is simply you have some movable object, you have a description of your environment, what your workspace is, and you often have like a start and a goal configuration, and your goal is to move from the start to the goal. What's shown here is this alpha puzzle. This is a traditional benchmark. It's a hard motion planning problem. In that case, one of the objects, the red tube, is the movable thing. And this is an example of a problem that once you know the trick, you know, it's easy to solve. And the trick is that particular configuration right there where the two pipes are aligned. But this is an example of something where there's very few configurations which are key. And if you were to try to design some algorithm to discover those on its own, it's very tough. So it's just very few key configurations. These are some examples where we have many degrees of freedom. So there we have, you know, skeletons, and there's, you know, a number of degrees of freedom here, just a few of the actual ones, and planning for that. In these examples, they're foldable objects. And again, these are very high dimensional problems with many different degrees of freedom. And the robotic manipulator has fewer of them, right? But it's nevertheless, we know a high degree of freedom problem. Can even get more if you have soft systems, you have deformable objects. So there you essentially have an infinite number of degrees of freedom. Here we have the same trajectory that's being followed by two different deformable objects, and they just need to deform to avoid collision with the tubes there. Another example that comes is in computer-aided design, mechanical designs. Here, traditionally, all the designs, even though CAD systems were used to design things, the testing was often done with physical mock-ups. And these are actually two examples that came from General Electric, where the engineers came up with these initial designs. They decided not to go with them because they weren't actually able to test them sufficiently to determine if they were possible. So the tube here, they designed it, they knew it fit together in the final location, but they weren't, it wasn't clear to them that it could be assembled. So they were, you know, manufactured separately, and they needed to put them together. That was an example there where, in fact, they went with a new design, but it turned out if they had had a motion planner that was integrated into their CAD system, they could have used it. The other one on the right there, that's a part of an aircraft engine, and circled is a part that needs to be occasionally replaced. So they needed to make the design in such a way so that this part could be removed fairly easily. And you can see that they have, you can hopefully see a little bit, that they have bent some of the pipes. And they did that imagining that the removable trajectory, they would rotate the part a little bit and pull it out. And it turned out that actually, and that's not a good thing to do, to put, you know, extra bends into your pipes and fittings if that's not necessary. And it turned out it was possible actually to remove that part without doing that. But that was something, again, that they couldn't test, but it was later on with the motion planner. So in the design phase, there's that. And then there's also now in the training phase. And when you have, if you can have like an augmented reality system where you can overlay the physical with the removal trajectory for a mechanic, this would be very useful for training. Now we have multiple agents. On the bottom there, the one that's moving right now, that's the situation where we have one agent that's trying to influence the motions of the other agents, which are themselves exhibiting, basically standard flocking type behaviors. They're just looking to their neighbors in their local environment. They're trying to stay together. The shepherd agent is trying to get them into that little corral. They don't know that. Let's see. The disassembly planning one up on the upper left, that's where I mentioned this in the previous slide, wanting to be able to know whether something could be assembled. Well, typically what they do is they may design it in the assembled state in order to determine if they could do that, you can disassemble it. On the upper right there, that's a project that we did together with the School of Architecture. They were interested in understanding and studying, essentially kind of exit strategies for people in a building, and then leaving a building, going to the parking lot, getting into their cars. So they wanted to design the whole structure there together for campus planning, actually. So one last example in another realm is in biomolecules and proteins. So it turns out a protein is essentially a sequence of amino acids, and it's kind of like a very long articulated linkage. And one of the things that and the function of a protein is very related to its final three-dimensional structure, which there is in most proteins a stable state that they will go to. One of the things that we could do with these motion planning methods is study the flexibility and how a protein might attain its final motion. And up on the upper right, another thing that is studied. So drugs typically work by finding some binding site on the surface of the protein, which might be, the surface might be inside a tunnel or something. And the protein molecule itself is flexible, as well the drug molecule is also flexible. So you have these two flexible objects, and you can imagine the drug molecule is a robot, and it's trying to move through this dynamic flexible setting to the binding site. So these problems, all of them are problems that we've studied in my group using the same basic algorithms. And oftentimes what happens is when we started off with robotics, and then I accidentally started working on the biomolecules because I had worked on the paper folding problem. Actually, this is an interesting story. So we had someone who came was giving a job talk, and he had a robot that was folding a box. And I asked him, how did he fold the box? Did he use a motion planner to come up with a plan for folding the box? And in his job talk, he laughed at me, basically. At the time, he's like, we can't have there wouldn't be a motion planner that could fold that box. And so, I thought our planner could fold the box. So I was sitting there with my student. I'm like, Guang, I think you could fold that box. And so when he came the next day for the one-on-one meeting with me, I showed him this. And we're still good friends. We did not hire him. That's not why. But so be careful, though, of telling people, no, that's impossible. But anyway, so that started us with this origami and paper folding, which then I started working with colleagues in material science on smart materials. But then I don't remember where I was at some conference, and Jean-Claude Latome, who's like one of the fathers of motion planning, I showed him in fact, the soccer ball animation. And he's like, oh, Nancy, did you ever think about folding proteins? And it had, absolutely never occurred to me to think about folding proteins. So then I went back and I reached out to a faculty member in biochemistry, and I'm like, would you like to talk about, protein folding? And so he invited me over to his group meeting. I went over there, I showed him those paper animations, and then we started working on the biomolecules. So the thing is, these are like algorithms that generally can move, plan for the motions of objects, multi-agent systems, there's more of them. And, the things that for all of these things here, we've used the same basic algorithms and code base. And every time we find a new one, we actually find something that we don't really do very well. It causes us to improve the algorithm in that space, and it often leads to an improvement on the original problem too. So what I want to do, and here, let me ask you, how many of you are familiar with sampling-based planning? Okay, so I can go very quick on those kind of things. And I want to give you kind of a couple of overviews of a quick insight of a few of the methods that we've done over the years with my group, and then I'll talk more about the directions that we're working on currently. So I probably don't need to talk about configuration space here. So I will skip that, just to kind of remind you about the correlation between motion planning in C space and in the workspace. What we do is we have, here we have the triangle as my robot in the workspace. It translates to a point in configuration space. The annoying thing really about this is I've translated these super simple rectangular objects into these, more complicated objects in configuration space. I have here a 2-dimensional workspace. I have a 3-dimensional configuration space, XY point coordinates of one point of my triangle plus the orientation of one of them. So that means that each dimension in the theta direction is one different orientation of the triangle. So in the workspace, the path is going to be a swept volume. In configuration space, it's going to be just some one-dimensional sequence of points. So the complexity of motion planning then is hard, right? And still, the very best algorithm that we have that solves this problem is exponential in the dimension of the robot's configuration space, and that was John Canny's PhD thesis back in 1986. So what this really means is we can't use an exact method for pretty much any problem we really care about solving. So we rely on randomized algorithms, which trade, the full completeness of the planner for probabilistic completeness and a major gain in efficiency. So there's kind of 2 variants of these. There's the multi-query planning, where you basically want to solve multiple instances of the same problem in the same environment. And in that, we construct this thing called a roadmap, which we could use over and over again for planning. And then there's the single query planning, where you basically just need to solve one or maybe just a very few queries. And that for those, we have these tree-based planners. The multi-query planning was proposed, kind of the initial methods were proposed independently by Lydia Kovratky and Jean-Claude Latome and Petr Svěska and his advisor, Mark Overmars. What we usually cite is the joint journal paper that they wrote together. And then on the single query planning, Steve Val and James Kuffner came up with this RRT method, which is very, very common today. I bet you all probably maybe have even implemented your own version of that. So they basically use the same set of primitive operations. And I'm just going to quickly review the original uniform sampling-based one. So in this one, there's a roadmap construction and pre-processing. Here, what we do is we randomly sample points, configurations, and we test each one that we generated. If it's valid, if it's invalid, we discard it. So in this case, I'd keep all the blue ones here. Then for each sample that I retained, I'm going to identify its k nearest neighbors, typically some small number of k, 3, 5, 10, something like that. And I'm going to use some simple deterministic local planner, usually just a straight line and configuration space to connect them. I'm going to discard the ones that are invalid. So it doesn't mean that there aren't connections possible. It just means that that particular, planner that I chose didn't work with it. After this, I have my roadmap. For query processing, now you have your start and your goal. You work to connect those to the roadmap using often your same local planning strategy. And then you use your favorite graph search technique to pull out a path connecting the start and goal. So again, it's not finding an optimal path. It's just looking to see if there is a path. So the good news of this, they were very revolutionary at the time. They're probabilistically complete. That means if you sample enough, eventually you're going to end up with a roadmap that represents the connectivity of the underlying space. They're easily to apply in high dimensional space. That was a problem before. All we have to do to apply these, the only primitive operations we need are to generate a sample and to test the validity of a sample. That's the only two things that you really need, right? So generating a sample, I know what my configuration space is, so I just need a value for each of the elements of that. And then this local planner, if we use a straight line, I just generate the points along that, and I test each one for validity. So, and they support very fast queries with enough pre-processing. So if I've got a good roadmap, I can solve queries very fast. And so they were actually, it was amazingly simple method. I mean, that's why this is how I fell in my PhD studies. I did not study robotics. I was a theoretical computer scientist. I worked on parallel algorithms for computational geometry problems. When I went to become a faculty member, I'm like, what can I do that's actually going to be more useful? And where would they need these tools? I thought robotics. So I went to the library. The ICWR proceedings were still printed on paper at that point. There were 4 volumes, so it was like this stack. I got a stack of 4 volumes from the library. And I happened to find that paper, Lydia Krawacki's paper. And I read it and I just thought, oh, this is a beautiful method. And it really is. It's so simple. I explained it to you right now. And I can explain it to a high schooler. They understand it. And it was revolutionary. It solved many methods that we just couldn't solve before. However, it didn't solve everything. In fact, it often didn't work when we, there were problems that it didn't work very well with. So for example, one of the key problems is this narrow passage problem, which we talk about in motion planning. And the challenge there is the original strategies were using uniform sampling in the configuration space. And if I need to move through a narrow region in the configuration space, that method's just not going to work, frankly, because your chance of getting one of those important configurations through random sampling is 0. So here's just kind of something to kind of, give a sense of that. But, if you're doing this uniform sampling, you're going to get the samples where there's a lot of free space and where planning is actually pretty easy. But we're not going to get them where we need to connect them. And even more, if you need to do something that requires contact, there you actually need to sample points that are on surfaces. And the chance of doing that is even smaller. So, and basically the work of my group, that's what we've worked on, is trying to focus on developing strategies that work in these kind of situations. So to take that same simple, beautiful strategy and try to make it work on these harder situations where it didn't. So here's the very first idea that I had when I read that paper. So the simple point is, to navigate the narrow passages, we need the points there. But with the uniform sampling strategy, we're not going to have the samples there. So the idea is simple. Can we sample nodes near these see obstacle surfaces? The problem is, like, when we look at this thing, it's deceptive. The problem is we can't construct those surfaces, so we don't have a representation of them. On the other hand, we do have information that we weren't using if we're just doing uniform sampling in configuration space. We have the models of the workspace obstacles. So can we use that information? And it turns out, yeah, it's really super easy to do that. So in this situation, let's say I have a configuration space obstacle. I find a point that's colliding with it. So some invalid point. That's easy for us to generate. I choose a point in collision. Then I select a random direction in configuration space. And now I look for a free point in that direction. And once I do that, we're home free. Now we can just use a bisection search strategy to find some point near the surface. So I do it again. Now I'm going to continue between points 2 and 3. I do it again. I know that there's a surface someplace between 3 and 4. I do it again. And basically you stop when you get to whatever your tolerance is about where you feel like you're near the surface. One of the annoying things about this that pestered me for years is this example illustrates that ray I selected, it crosses the surface in many points. I have no idea how many. I have no idea which one I'm going to get. So I can't say anything about the distribution of the points that I'll get on the surface of that obstacle. So there's a number of heuristics we have used that end up working actually pretty well in practice, to help you guide that. But that was the thing that bugged me forever. Are we moving? There we go. So that started off basically an industry, and it's still continuing today, of many people coming up with many different variants of these methods. And here's just a very sparse sampling of them, heavily biased towards my group's work. But there's just a ton of them, and they've gone on and on. So I just want to kind of go quickly through a few of the different ones to kind of give you a few different ideas here. So this is like the question that bugged me forever. Can we generate samples uniformly on a surface without knowing where it is? So I have no description of it. I don't know where it is, and I want to sample points uniformly on the surface of it. So it sounds kind of unlikely. It turns out it's possible. So this was actually suggested by David Epstein, who's a computational geometer at UC Irvine. So in the strategy we just were talking about, what we were sampling were points, configuration space points. Instead of sampling points, if I randomly sample fixed length line segments, and then I identify all the points. So now I'm going to have to find all the points where that line segment intersects the surface, and we train those as samples. It turns out that we can prove that this does give us a uniform coverage of the surface. There's obviously some trade-offs. If the smaller that segment is, the closer it is to a point. And so I'm going to have fewer. I'm going to have more and more samples to try to intersect the surfaces. The longer segments that I use, then I'm going to have to check every single point on that segment to identify which points it crosses. So that's going to take longer. So it turns out this is, I would not recommend using this strategy unless you were using it in a very restricted space where you really did need that coverage. There it's fine, especially if it's a small area, you can do that. And then you also don't need to, it's okay if the segments, if you're essentially willing to sample pretty densely in that area, this is better, this is going to work better for you than basically sampling all the points in that area. But it was at least satisfying to know that it's possible to do that. Does that surprise anyone? No, it surprised me. And it's also super simple. That's the things that I like a lot. So here's another question for you. Can we increase sampling in narrow regions without knowing where they are? Okay, that's what we want to do, right? Answer, yes. Okay, turns out. So here's the kind of key observation, is that we can efficiently retract almost any configuration, free or not, onto the medial axis of the free space without computing the medial axis explicitly. Okay, so here's the basic approach. You sample a point in configuration space. Let's say I pick that one in the middle of that obstacle. I'm going to find the closest C obstacle boundary point. So in this case, it would be that point on the surface. And now I'm going to basically push that configuration in that direction until we have two closest points. So, and that point will be on the medial axis. So that's the strategy. So, and you can do the same thing if the point you happen to pick is in the free space already. You still pick the closest boundary point, you push away from it until you have two closest points. And it turns out this actually, oh, that's the one for the free space, improves our probability of getting points in the narrow region. So so on the top is basically an illustration of the probability that a PRM, a uniform sampling point, will be in the narrow region. It's basically the volume of the corridor over the overall volume of the configuration space if I'm doing uniform sampling. In this case here, in this medial axis PRM, that shaded blue region on the bottom, any point I sample in there will be pushed to the medial axis there. So that means that the probability of getting a point in that corridor is going to be the volume of that corridor plus the volume of the surrounding obstacle over the volume of the configuration space. So if I have like fat enough obstacles, this could be a significant increase. If I have, you know, basically super narrow obstacles, this is not going to help very much. How does this, does anyone thoughts on this one? This one surprised me too. I have left I expect, you have a question?
Find the nearest point.
Okay, that is the key question, which often people don't ask. In general, you know, so this relied on me being able, when I sampled a point, to identify the closest boundary point, and we don't have the boundary. Okay, so how do I do that? So in fact, if we want to do this exactly, we can't really do it for even a six-dimensional configuration space. There are some very special cases with some special metrics we can do that. We did that on some particular Riemannian manifolds. But again, it's not something that I would use in practice. On the other hand, this approach gave us an idea. And so what we do is, instead of having that explicit calculation of the closest boundary point, we try to randomly determine that. So typically what we do is we shoot a few rays from my point. I find whichever one of those is the closest, I just go with it. And it turns out that works very well. That was a way where we took kind of a probabilistic approach to try to mimic what we would have done if we had been able to explicitly do it, and it ended up giving us an idea that worked very well. And that allows us to basically push that into higher dimensions. Hi. Yeah, sure. So it's not complete. You're correct. What happens is, by work well, I mean that for problems that uniform sampling strategies don't work on, basically they would run forever. They will solve them in a reasonable amount of time, like minutes. So, but there's no, and again, it's not going to work in all cases. So in a situation like this, if I have fat obstacles, in a situation like this, it will solve this, immediately. And no matter how small I make that corridor. Whereas if I were to use the original uniform sampling strategy, it won't solve it ever, right? So this one would work well, very well in a situation like this. I'm sure that's not very satisfying. Regina. Well, I'm not, but. Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Why not move the, so you're.
You have these narrow spaces which you are struggling with. Why not to move some of the pieces of furniture and then resolve the problem for one piece of furniture and then go to the next one?
In fact, that when we deal with these like CAD designs, that is what we're doing there. We're taking, one of the parts at a time.
Okay.
So we are also, we need to work in dynamic environments. these are really just, I'm just kind of trying to show you some of the things that I find, these are just simple sampling things for very simple problems. But we do take these same strategies and we apply them in, real settings.
As you know, Einstein said, physics is geometry and geometry is physics. So I'm trying to see why not to bring forces and velocities and all these physical properties.
We should, I agree. In these basic things, we typically are not, at least in these roadmap-based strategies, right? Because here we're just trying to get a sense of the configuration space. The tree-based planners, the RT methods, that's absolutely right. We're working in state space. We have more things going on there. And we should be using that to guide our exploration.
Thank you.
So, okay, one more thing. Here's like one of my favorite ones. And this one we haven't resolved yet. So here's the thing is, can't we just improve our probability of finding these narrow passages? So here's basically the problem which we can't really solve. These two situations here, we can't distinguish between them with our sampling strategies. We don't know if it's just a super narrow passage connecting these two regions or if there isn't one at all. And if I do my sampling, I might get these two roadmaps and I just don't know. And this is what we normally do. So the narrow passages are hard to distinguish from the block space. So here's another idea. What if we map both the free and the block space? Then these maps we would get for these two things are going to look different. My maps of the free space are still look the same, but my maps of the block spaces, I'm going to have two components that aren't connected. So they're different. And that's basically the simple idea. And the other thing is, when I tried to make a connection between the components in the block space, I'm going to fail. And when I fail, well, I'm going to have witness. I'm going to have one of these points in my narrow region. And that's an important point. So we can retain those, and that can help us distinguish this narrow, that narrow passage from a block space. So this was actually a project that one of my PhD students did, but it was done in collaboration with the very first high school student that ever worked with me. He was bugging me. He was so patient. He sat out my office, I think, for like 2 weeks, and finally I talked to him. And he's like, I want to work with you. And so I'm like, well, I've never worked with high school student. What would I do with you? So he came for the summer. He worked on this project, and it ended up getting, he won like the first prize in the Siemens, competition for this. But it's another example of like how the ideas are so simple that, at least at the basic level, you can explain them to anyone. So here's some kind of simple results for this. Just to show, so we tried this one in this algorithm with narrow passages that have different narrowness, and basically the key situation here. So the red bar shows the number of points that we got in these passages with that toggle. So we called that toggle strategy because we're toggling between the free and the block space. And you see that it's much less sensitive to the narrowness of the region than any of these other strategies. These are other, common strategies that we used, including some of the ones I shared with you. And yes, it is decreasing as the passage gets narrower, but we also have a lot fewer points there too. So the one kind of very interesting thing that which we still haven't fully explored, and so this is a challenge to you, is that it doesn't have, so the normal property for these sampling-based strategies was essentially tells you that as you increase your sampling density, you will eventually have something that will, represent the underlying connectivity of your configuration space. And that the narrower the regions, the more samples you're going to need. This strategy doesn't have that property. Instead, though, I showed you the 2D case where it's pretty simple. Even when we move to 3D, if you could imagine, you have like, some tube going through configuration space. That's going to be hard to find with this strategy still. But there is, if instead of a tube through, my higher dimensional space, if I have some kind of thing that's more like a plane, that's going to be a good separator, and that'll be easier for me to find. So it doesn't matter like how big it is, it matters more like how it kind of separates things. And so we were trying to come up with a good way to do that. And we made some progress, but I think, we haven't really fully understood that. And so I think we need to, though, rethink this whole probabilistic completeness property that we have for all these sampling-based methods if you use an approach like this. So, okay, now I see I've gone a little bit too long. So let's see. So I want to now talk about some kind of those are kind of the basics and the things that we apply. And we still are, working on more methods like that. I have, some students that are still working on the toggle strategies. Those are undergraduates. But there's other things we're trying to apply. And I would say current focuses are really working on guidance and collaboration. So we can use guidance from our workspace and also human guidance. And then also integrating task and motion planning. So what I was showing there was basically static examples for motion planning. And we have one of my students, he just graduated. He's working on his startup now. He came up with this new hypergraph representation for integrating task and motion planning. And another thing from like all along, as I told you, I started off working in parallel algorithms for computational geometry. Well, we're, in these large problems to scale to multi-agents, we need to take advantage of parallelism. There are a lot of opportunities for that, and distributed computing. So in guided planning, there's basically, kind of two strategies we've used. We've used basically skeletons or, kind of rough maps of the workspace to help guide our sampling, both for the tree-based, the RRT-based, and the roadmap-based strategies. And we've also been looking at, and we're working kind of more, seriously now on using human suggestions. So this example here, this pipe, that's an example which is really great example for human, insight, right? We look at that, exactly, not exactly, but really roughly what a trajectory would kind of essentially look like. But to ask a planner to figure that out is really tough. So are there ways that we can kind of combine that insight? So the skeleton guided planning, basically we've worked on both RRT and PRM, roadmap-based methods. And the idea here is you have, we call it dynamic region RRT and dynamic region PRM. The idea is you start off, you have some region of the space that you're looking at. You're going to use the skeleton to help you figure out kind of where to look next. So the skeleton is going to have points. So we start off there, we look to the next one, then we explore, and we use that to guide our exploration. Of course, this is not going to include all of the skeleton is just the workspace. It has, often we were using just a 2D skeleton. So it's certainly don't have all of your degrees of freedom, but you're using that to guide you and help you select some of them. Same thing for the roadmap-based methods. It works very well. And then more recently, some of my recent students have been applying that in a hierarchical fashion. So basically, we have some rough high-level thing. We start off there, then we go into the lower level. I think I will kind of keep going because I do want to tell you about our Mine in Vitro project. But here's just some kind of insight for using this hierarchical strategy is that it, compared to the other methods that are out there, it's, leads to both improved time for building the roadmap and for querying. And in terms of the querying, it often going to have more consistent performance, and it's more reliable basically. And it's improved on the roadmap construction time and in the query phase. So we need to do this also for multi-robot systems. So this is where we need like coordination. Let's see. Let me try to get those going. So composite RRT, that's where we just work in the composite C space. In this situation, we have robots that need to swap positions. Let me see the R's basically, if we did this using the skeleton, it's pretty obvious, right, that it should be helpful, but it allows us to coordinate better than just simply working in the composite C space. And it also, importantly, is scaling to a lot higher numbers of agents. So we have, pushed this out even further, but basically the number of agents that we can plan for is just, significantly more, at least an order of magnitude more than other methods. And it makes sense, right? You're using this underlying, guidance to help you, not waste time on exploring in regions that you shouldn't. And here's a hybrid planner approach that we've tried. And here the idea is we used actually a haptic input device. We attached it we used it for this tube example here. And you move that around, you collect an approximate trajectory. You don't necessarily need to have it be perfect. And in fact, it's very difficult to do that even with these systems today. So the idea is you construct some rough trajectory, you identify parts of it that are in collision. So this would be that blue part that's in the C obstacle there. Then we repair it we can use, in fact, we have used like those other strategies that I shared with you, but you try to improve that portion and then go on. And here's some results that we had with this. So let me explain this flange problem. 0.85, 0.95, and 1 represents the amount that we shrunk the tube to make it be an easier problem. So 0.85 meant it was 85% of its original size. I think the one in the upper part is the 0.85 version. And what we did here is we applied our fully automatic method to solve that. And we did. It took us, around 500 seconds. And then we also used this thing that we called haptic push. That's where it's not counting the user collection time, but it's just the time from that the planner had needed to fix that problem. It was just a few seconds. For the 0.95 version of the problem, our automatic planner, it would have eventually solved it. We know it would have, but we stopped it after some time. The haptic push, in that case, we had the user, which was one of our grad students, collect the trajectory. And there, it took a lot longer for the planner to fix that problem up. The yellow one is the interesting one. So for that one, we took the version the fixed version for the 0.85 version of the problem, I used that as input. And it turned out that was a much better starting point for the planner than the user collected trajectory. And then in fact, that's actually how we solved the original version of the problem. We took the correct version for the 0.95 one and we used that as input. And then that's eventually how we solved it. So unfortunately, this doesn't show me I needed the human insight, right? It showed me that I could start off with the sampling-based solution and then iteratively improve it. This is not going to work for all methods. Like, for example, this does not work with alpha puzzle. If you make the alpha puzzle easier, like by increasing the gap or something, then you fundamentally change the way the solution trajectory is. Or if it's not if the user doesn't have insight into it, it's not going to work. But for problems that it is, I think it's still, we're exploring that further actually now that we have, this was done, many years ago. And now we're working with, more modern VR tools and we can do things a lot better. So I think there's a lot of room for doing this. And then Regina, getting back to what you were talking about, we are also looking into situations where we do co-design of the problem of the workspace with the user that way. And then you can, try to design a workspace that works well for whatever you're trying to, automate. Okay, so yes. Oh. Yes. Approximate convex decomposition. Yeah. No, we still are. I'm not talking about it today though, but yes, I think that's a really important way to work with these more complex problems. And it's again, so the idea there is it is hierarchical. We would do we called it approximate convex decomposition. We can basically represent an object, kind of we try to not worry about the detail that we don't need until we need to. So you can think about it as coming up like in the simplest way, maybe a convex hull of something allows you to say, I'm only going to consider things outside the convex hull until I need to go in, and then you can iteratively do that, and you reveal the complexity that you need to when you need to. And in fact, actually, that's the same kind of approach that we have been using most recently to deal with multi-agent systems in a slightly, at least I feel like they're the same way. I will actually get to that in a second, but that's I guess that is maybe in that same direction. It's a technique, right? A strategy. Okay. So for task and motion planning, so most of the things we've talked about so far was just motion planning, but we usually need to do task and motion planning. People used to do, one thing first. They would do their task planning and then they would do the motion planning, but that's not always the smartest way because, again, it's this kind of like co-consideration of all the complexity that you need to deal with at the same time. So this is my student, James Motes, who has just recently graduated. He came up with this new representation that's basically, it's a hypergraphs representation that allows us to consider different parts of the problem together, and we can do it in a hierarchical fashion there too. So it allows us to basically decouple the individual tasks or the robots and iteratively improving plans and resolving conflicts. So I guess this is, again, taking that same kind of strategy and applying it to this problem, which we model with a graph. So, kind of a simple way to think about it, let's say I have two robots and an object, and I have, robot one supposed to pick up the object and give it to robot two, and then robot two is supposed to take it. So I start off with, 3 individual pieces. So we kind of consider the object as a full part of the problem definition together with the robots. Then there's this pick situation where robot one takes the object and picks it, and now we have this. Then there's the handoff, and there's the place. So let's see, here's kind of to give you a sense of what happens. It basically easily supports decoupled and coupled search and allows you to dynamically switch between them too. So this greedy version, that's the green triangles. That one, basically, it's very easily able to solve large problem instances, but it's not necessarily finding the best solution. And then we have another version of it so the other kind of the competitive method out there is a fully composite method that works in the full composite space, which it works. Okay, it comes up with good solutions, but doesn't scale really at all. It doesn't scale beyond like 4 total, objects. So we can actually scale beyond that a bit better, but not too far. So this is still kind of, I'd say, work in progress, but good. Oh, I forgot to play this. Basically, it's doing a handoff. Let me move forward. And then adapting this to multiple agents. We're bringing in parallel and hierarchical strategies. And most recently, we are working on this thing that we're calling adaptive robot coordination. And again, what it's doing is it's adjusting the coordination during the planning. Let's see, something should be playing here. I thought. Well, it's okay. Yeah, nothing is happening. It's basically competitive with both. They're essentially decoupled strategies that just plan individually for the robots, and then they try to deal with the situation later. And then there's composite strategies that put all of the robots together. This scenario I have that I can't play for you, it's basically those 4 different colors are, planar manipulators. And when you start off, the ones that are of the same color have to be coordinated. And the final solution is they're all supposed to twist and get into the 4 closest to the center are supposed to get into the center. So later on, you have one of each color that's supposed to be coordinating with each other. So the composite strategy should actually plan for all 8 of these arms at the same time all along, and it's infeasible. Our approach basically starts off and it plans for the blue and the green and the red and the yellow together. And then once they are separated, then it plans for the 4 together. And that ends up working well. I guess it's just not, is anything happening? Now it's not even moving. Maybe I'm frozen. Let's see. I'm not seeing anything happening, and it's, okay, let me try this maybe. Oh, now they're playing. Okay. Go figure. So you see now they're playing, now they're going to move to the center, where now those 4 in the center are going to be coordinating with each other. And we've we have like hundreds of agents that can plan together in this strategy. So basically, if you weren't already, amazed by sampling-based planning, I just find it truly amazing, the variety of different problems that we can apply these same methods to. And all those sampling strategies that we talked about, they work on all of them. And when we come up with one that works better, it scales better, then it's going to lead to improvement in the others. And we really do work in all of our algorithm development and everything is in configuration space. And then there's this step of applying it to a new thing. The validation check's very general. That's often where the complexity or the cost is kind of hidden. But that's all you need. You just really need this validity check, and you need the ability to generate the point. So now I do want to, can I have like 5 more minutes? So I want to just give a preview of this new project. It has nothing to do, well, I won't say it has nothing to do with sampling-based planning, because I want to be able to do sampling-based planning with it. But it's a very different project. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build these trainable biological systems that will be built from programmable biological neural processors. So basically the way to think about it is, today we have computers that are based on silicon chips. We'd like to have some computational system where the chip has, instead of the silicon digital innards, there's an actual living biological neural network with real neurons, biological neurons. And so they are the chips. And then we could build systems from them, and we want to be able to program. So we want to develop this computing stack around this in vitro living neurons. Why would we want to do this? Well, first off, just because we want to see if we can do it, to be honestly. That's the first question there. But it's also, if we have real biological neurons that are the foundation of this system, they are going to be suitable for different kinds of things, right? They will be, we are very good at learning and having, emergent behaviors. A system built on this, we believe that could have, potential for doing those kind of things. Imagine that they are, we're going to have systems that could grow, they could heal themselves. So if I have some chip that dies, I might be able to replace it with another one, and it will learn from the other chips that it's connected to. just, mind-blowing, really. So this is a project. It's about a year in. It's funded by the NSF Expeditions and Computing Program, and it's a 7-year project. We're 1 year in, so we are still very early. But there's going to be, wetware. That's our, hardware. We have to figure out how to put them together in, like the computer architecture sense of the word. We need to figure out how to program them. And then there's this embodiment step. And for that, we're looking at biohybrid robotics. We're really focused and, really, a key concern of ours is for this to be open. So we're trying to, we have open sourced everything, including the wetware. We want people to join us. It's a team that's very diverse, mostly based in the Midwest, but includes people, I don't know what happened to that slide, but it includes, computer science, neuroscience, mechanical engineering, bioengineering, ethics, because we have an ethicist working with this. It's just an amazing team. Of the team, there's 3 of us are computer scientists. The rest are in mechanical engineering, physics, etc. Yeah, I'm not sure what's happened to these slides. So, one of the kind of motivations, or I guess it's not necessarily motivation, but it's a difference between a biological system and like a traditional computer system is, just think about like the deep learning and the learning-based systems that we're all experiencing this huge growth in. They require a ton of energy. And it's just not sustainable to have that kind of compute associated with all the things we want to do. That's a huge cost. On the other hand, if you think about like the brain, it really doesn't require a whole lot of energy at all, and it does amazing things. So we are going to hope to be able to plug into that, and that's for sure something we already have. Is that we have these systems, and they definitely do not require that kind of energy. Also, we can have these very intricate, complex 3D architectures that happen. And it's just super dense connections. So can this be done? So yeah, something else happened to this slide, but so hopefully it's going to show. So basically, we're collaborating with a team from based out of Illinois who's been working on these projects for the last 2 decades. And they have really amazing things where they have integrated neurons with muscle tissue. They're growing, they can stimulate them and have them do things, interesting things. They can grow them in these 3D architectures and rings. And one of the things they have is they have basically built this little device where there's muscle tissue, and then you can see there the neurons are growing, and they've actually can put it in fluid and it will swim. So they stimulate these things. I think I have this in the next one. Yeah, so we can stimulate these things with, light, and yeah, there we go, do stuff. So there's no programming here, but it's the proof of concept that we can integrate, grow neurons and stimulate them and do things. So what we have also developed is we have now this hardware system, which is relatively, inexpensive. Where we grow, this is kind of one of these cells, and inside would be these neural cultures, 60, 100,000 neurons network. And then we can connect them with these digital, connections externally. And that's how this would be a chip. We have this available now. And this is kind of what we have where we grow these neurons. I think that should actually be an animation too, but it's not. But you will see actually the firing of them, you can see it changes. And we measured them. So we can record these signals that are coming from these neurons. And what we want to do is be able to figure out how to actually build that into a computational system. Here we go, yeah. So And this is basically we're recording the neurons, recording the spikes, and we can then use that to in these various computational models. So let's see. This shows this is what we have in the lab. I think Mark, you saw this, I think, yeah. So let's see, the software we have, yeah, okay. So we want to, I'm mindful of time, but the idea is we have a simulator. Our colleagues at Stanford have built a very high fidelity simulator of either a single neuron or populations of neurons. We're always going to have populations of neurons, like thousands, tens of thousands of neurons. And we want to be able to use that to help us kind of explore the different models of computation, because it's very, a lot of work to build and run an experiment and do one of these recordings with these populations of neurons. They live for, it takes like 2 or 3 weeks for them to grow and to start connecting, where we could actually stimulate them and record things. We've kept them alive for 2 to 3 months. We could probably keep them alive longer than that. It's just not something we've focused on yet. But it's a lot of work to take care of that. So we have to be very mindful and have done our homework before we ask them to be able to test something in the lab for us. But that's our, yeah, I guess that's really the message here, is we have the hardware foundation or the wetware foundations. We're trying to take some of these very theoretical models for neural computing and figure out how we could, apply them in this setting. And it really is the craziest thing I've been involved with, but it's very exciting, and we're having a lot of fun with it. So let me just finish here. This is basically all this work has been done with and mostly by my students and various colleagues too. So I just want to give a shout out to them. You mentioned ICRA 2015. I was a program chair there. That was a very special ICRA because it was all organized by women. And it was special to me. I was a program chair because I'm actually from Seattle. So I got to be in my hometown with that. And that was a picture of me with at that time, 11 of my current students, 8 of my former students, and some of their students, so grand students. I don't yet have a great grand student, but it's very close. So I'm looking forward to that. So, all right, well, that's it. And sorry for going long.
Any questions? Okay, I have questions. So I'm very interested in, like, for example, when the environment has some dynamic obstacles, and also in some case the environment is just partially observed. So how can we apply the PRM or how to incorporate this situation to it?
Yeah, excellent question, because that's basically, we're always in that situation, right? Our environment, we may not know where all the obstacles are. Things may change. So for that, most people use like lazy strategies where they do, initial validation, and then you can postpone some of your validation till later when you actually do observe that. And I would say that's, in some sense, though, it's kind of the same problem if you have multiple agents, right? Because those are dynamic obstacles that you need to plan for. So dealing with the dynamic obstacles, some people have come up with strategies where, like, you make assumptions. You know that this object is moving with this velocity in that trajectory. And that works, then you can plan explicitly for those. That's what these the method that I didn't really have much time to go into deals with. It's kind of deals with that locally. So you don't want to, and you can't really address that for the whole environment at all times, but you really only care and need to worry about where you are right now. So that's where these bringing in the local constraints and essentially kind of identifying the agents that you need to be worried about, whether or not they're other, robots, they are moving obstacles, they're unknown obstacles, and you move on. So that's the way that it's generally handled.
Thank you.
I was very curious about the integration of task and motion planning, and I was wondering if you think you could use similar methods to integrate planning with robot design.
So actually, that's a really interesting question. I think yes, the answer to that is yes. We're actually working with some companies who are interested in kind of that same question. They are definitely interested in trying to design for particular purposes. So they want to integrate the planning, into the whole cycle of evaluating the designs. I guess the one thing, so the way that we are using this hypergraph strategy for integrating task and motion planning, the one thing it really lets us do is identify sub areas or some sub parts of the task that we can focus on and not have to worry about the other regions. That's a part I'm not quite sure how this would work with co-design, but if you can identify certain sub pieces of it that do make sense to basically consider in isolation, absolutely. I think that's like kind of the key approach that I think we need to use to solve anything with high complexity. Is you shouldn't try to deal with it all at once. It's not even necessary, frankly. So you should identify the part that you need to work with currently, but not for the whole time, right? Just currently, and then move on, and you will have to do it again. And you'll have to reevaluate what you need to work with next.
This question is on the biological computing.
Mm-hmm.
So
over time, we've seen that the processors get more integrated than the more unbundled and specialized processors. Question though, since latency is now one of the key bottlenecks for a lot of these computing settings, do you see long-term the biological platform being a replacement, or powerful replacement for existing silicon? Despite this latency, or is it more of a research project right now to understand how?
Yeah.
How we can think?
So I do not think that these what we're calling it, that these neural biological systems would replace a supercomputer. I think for those big scientific workloads, for most of those big computations, those data sensors are going to be the way that we will go. But there may be certain learning types of applications that these types of systems might be more suitable for. And because just in one of our tiny little chips, we have 100,000 neurons. So they're very compact. They have a lot. The latency is not an issue there. So if we can figure out computations that are suitable for that type of system, that I think there's promise. But that's one of the things. So we had our first review so the NSF comes every year because it's one of their big investments and they want to check us out. And one of the things they're interested to know is because they get asked like this when they go to Congress, what is this good for? So I don't know the answer to that yet. That's one of our open questions. But my sense is for things that need to learn and have emergent behaviors, they should do well. Do you want to use this one? Yeah. Yeah, so we do have an ethicist. So just to make clear, these are they come from mouse stem cells. We're not, I think calling it mind in vitro was unfortunate. It's not a mind. It's not going to have consciousness. It's a network. It's a network of neurons that, communicate like neurons do. They pass signals from one place to another. We can record those. So from that perspective, we don't, we are not intending for it's not going to think, it's not going to be a mind like we have. It will have memories, so that's kind of how they work, right? So, they learn certain patterns, they learn certain pathways. The memory degrades over time, but that's how we train them, right? So we want them to learn. So there will be memories and those kind of things, but it's not a mind. So from that sense, I think the ethical, at least what we're doing is not a problem. If we were like taking pieces of a brain and trying to work with that I think would be another story. But we're not doing that, and I don't. That wouldn't even work for us. So yeah, but we do have an ethicist. That's something we need to think about. We ran like a workshop with all the people working on the project, because I need to be able to have a more intelligent answer when people ask me that question, for starters, right? Because people are going to ask those kind of questions. But I think, at the very basic sense, the things that like immediately come to your mind are just not an issue with this project. Should I?
Oh, I have one.
Oh, now the mic, it works.
So you mentioned it in one of your slides that that key to the effectiveness of your sampling-based motion planning would be a good representation of the sea space. And so I was wondering if you have any good ways to start to think about modeling sea space for problems such as finding the best protein binding site. These are problems that we don't encounter as usually, like as engineers usually. Yeah,
so I think one of the reasons that this works for like the protein, so what we're doing for the protein case is we are trying to build a map of the configuration space through these samples. And in that case, we actually evaluate the energy of every point that we are modeling. And for proteins, they have this concept that the energy landscape forms this kind of funnel in many thousands of dimensions, but there's this funnel concept, and the stable protein, the most, the native state, is the minimum of that. So what you could imagine, so our, I didn't have a chance to talk about this, but our strategy for kind of modeling the protein folding landscape, it fits in between, there's different strategies that biochemists have used. They do this thing called, molecular dynamics that will let them look at, that's a very high fidelity thing. They will sit there and they look at all the neighbors. What we are able to do with this is it gives us basically a hierarchical strategy to increasingly improve the map, the landscape that we have. In actually one of the co-design problems, the thing that you mentioned, we're also trying to think about these approaches work well. Here's the way I like to think about it. They work well if there's some structure to the underlying space that you're trying to map. And in the protein case, there's this funnel type thing. We are taking samples. And as I take more and more samples, the structure of this funnel will get more accurate. For some of these, we're exploring some question of looking at different designs, and as I move like some part or some pipe, in another way, what is that going to do to like the accessibility? I have an accessibility metric. So if there is structure to the underlying space, then these strategies can be used to map them and then exploit them. And the way they're going to map them, they're going to be increasingly accurate. Or most of the things we're doing now is we've understood we can't map the whole thing, but we don't usually need to. So we should try to focus our attention to the spaces that are key. So the problem now is identify those key regions and now focus your attention there. And that makes these problems that are basically impossible, somewhat more intractable. So, tractable, not intractable.
Do we have time for a final question? Okay, I'm sure you've been asked this question before. So proteins fold at the timescales of microseconds. are we doing something wrong in motion planning? We take hundreds of seconds. So sampling-based motion planning is great and it has all its virtues, but it's slow. So what is missing?
Good question. I think, well, I mean, biology, just like we looked when we're comparing like this biological based computational system with a silicon based one, it uses, much less energy. It's much more compact. So, I think, biology has evolved over a long time and it's very good. I don't know that, I think we're trying to do these things, actually, which I was just mentioning, to identify where we need to put our attention and focus on that quickly. That's one of the things, that's how we can do better. I don't think we should be able to do the same or even as well, because we are built to do different things than we're trying to build these systems for. So I don't think that's a goal we should even have, but we can try to learn from those systems to see how we can do better with the things that we're building. Like, I would never think we could build a, I don't know, now it wouldn't be artificial, but it would be a brain through our own, growing of neurons. Yes. But they're not planning, right? Yeah. So they're just, taking a random walk and getting to where they want to go. We are trying to understand the overall space, right? So, and one of our goals actually would be to try to engineer that space, or maybe understand what we could do to modify a protein so it wouldn't, do that, but it would do this other things, right? So we're trying to actually understand the whole system, not just, replicate it.
Do you want? Yeah. More information, be sure to follow us on social media, check out our website. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.